Hey everyone, happy Friday. It's 4 o'clock in the East, and we head west. We're counting down to a night of dueling rallies out there. Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz are headed to the Sun Belt for a rally in Arizona tonight, while the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president finally leaves Mar-a-Lago, where he's been holed up all week, to head to the not known to be battleground state of Montana. We talk a lot about split screens around here and the Earth 1, Earth 2 of it all, but this might be the ultimate political split screen news cycle. One side is executing a coherent political strategy, barnstorming through battleground states like a heat-seeking missile, while the other has been mostly out of sight this week, hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. One side offering powerful, infectious, joyful warrior vibes, the other offering whatever they call Donald Trump's rambling, apocalyptic, lie-filled, divorce from reality message yesterday, to say nothing of the growing enthusiasm gap. Tonight's rally in Arizona caps off a week of rock star receptions for the Democratic ticket. Every battleground state they've set foot in, from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin to Michigan. Harris and Walz have commanded crowds that Donald Trump makes clear he still dreams of. People standing in line for hours, walking miles to get to their rallies, crowds so enormous they spilled out across airplane hangars. And there's a different reception on the ground to tell you about. Today in Arizona, the local papers are waxing poetic about the political phenomenon that is the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket. Here's one of those headlines. Quote, "There's never been something like this." That's referring to tonight's rally outside of Phoenix. And this, quote, "The energy level is just out of this world." Meanwhile, over in Montana, the local press there reporting out stories about how Trump still hasn't paid his bills from the last time he came to town. Or consider that Kamala Harris is racking up endorsements from lifelong Republicans. People like the first female mayor of Scottsdale, Arizona, who described this political moment right now as, quote, "a sea change in attitude in Arizona," adding, quote, "People are just joyous. People are so confident of the job that Vice President Harris can do that there's room for joy," end quote. There it is again, the J word. Joy. There's also the historic political endorsement today from the nation's oldest and largest Latino civil rights group, the League of United Latin American Citizens, which endorsed Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. It's the first time in the organization's 95-year history that it has made a presidential endorsement. In a press release, they cited the urgent need to put a stop to this, quote, "the politics of hate-mongering and scapegoating Latinos and immigrants." And Trump? He seems to be experiencing whatever the opposite of momentum is, struggling now with even some of the furthest corners of the MAGA movement, like the mega popular podcaster Joe Rogan, as well as right-wing pundits Nick Fuentes and Laura Loomer. So the split screen is not so subtle today. Contagious enthusiasm and the competent political strategy being executed versus 1 week spent in Mar-a-Lago, culminating in some MAGA loyalists turning on the candidate. Maybe could be boiled down to the politics of joy versus the politics of retribution. The New York Times writes this, quote, "Harris is positioning herself as the smiling trooper who is asking voters to choose between the future and the past. We are not going back," she tells her large crowds, and they respond with raucous chants repeating it back. Quote, "It's no accident that joy, a battle-tested version of it, has become the backbone of Ms. Harris's campaign." We will be joined by Beto O'Rourke in just a few minutes, but we start today with our dear friend Michael Steele, the former chairman of the RNC, now the co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend. Also, the Reverend Al Sharpton is with us, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, the president of the National Action Network. MSNBC columnist and contributor Charlie Sykes is back, and Democratic strategist Aisha Mills is here, all dear friends of this broadcast. Michael Steele, I start with you. I keep saying this, I think, because I worked on a campaign that tried to manufacture some of these things, momentum, movement in the polls, crowds. It cannot be manufactured. It can be executed. Nope. And we should say this campaign is executing at every level. But this kind of enthusiasm is phenomenon level. Your thoughts?
It is. You organically can't make people like you. You just can't. Sorry. You can have all the bells and whistles. You can open up an airplane hangar, but that doesn't mean people will show up. And they certainly won't show up to the extent that we've seen with Kamala Harris having, okay, open up hangar 2, folks. So yeah, it's real. And I think it's something. You touched on this, I think, earlier in the week, and you emphasized it again in the lead-in, and that is the J word, joy. That is something that's so coming out of the gut that people just feel this sense of relief, that there is relief here. I don't have to live in a dystopian world that's being created by Donald Trump, where the only thing you're telling me is you want to be my dictator and, oh, yeah, you're going to exact retribution on people that you don't like. Meanwhile, leaving on the table all these other issues that are important to me, and therefore I have to wait until you get done with your retribution to address the cost of goods and services, my ability to grow my business, how I'm going to educate the kids in an environment where education may be tricky. And, you got CRT that you're telling me is bad, but I don't think that's a problem because my kid isn't in that grade, all these things and all that pressure. Kamala Harris has found a way to pick a pin and stick a pin in that and break that pressure valve open for folks, and you're seeing it. Folks coming out, they're smiling, they're happy, they're anticipatory, and that, Nicole, there's not a campaign on the planet that can manufacture that. If people don't feel it, they won't give it, and they give it freely when they do because you're the candidate that brings that out of them. And I think that's something that Kamala has been able to do. And so the more Donald Trump and his ilk mispronounce her name, the more they level up bogus swift boating charges against her VP choice, the more these people fall back on joy. And they're like, I like this feeling better than the crap you're serving up.
Rev, there's a thing I think that women really are feeling, and that is the politics of being underestimated. Vice President Harris has been criticized for laughing, and it seems that she is, pun intended, having the last laugh. Let me read this reporting in the New York Times. Quote, adopting joy as a political shield has allowed Ms. Harris and Mr. Walz to throw some bare-knuckled punches at Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. Both Democrats do it with a smile, and the crowd eats it up. There is no mistaking the sharpness and the specificity of their attacks, and they do not slide over to his supporters, something that I think people have grappled with for 9 years. They are surgical strikes against Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance.
Very surgical, very strategic. And I think that what is most impressive to me is they refuse to fight his fight plan. Trump is used to setting the pace, setting the tenor of any political battle, and people react to him. What Vice President Harris has done and Governor Walz has done is they've set their own pace, their own tempo, and they're not reacting to him. He will come with an attack. They will just kind of deflate it, may give a 1 or 2 sentence answer, and keep going with a positive agenda and saying at the same time, we're not going back to the days of segregation, misogyny, before pre-Dobbs decision, voter rights, and the like. And as long as you don't fight another person's fight, they become off balance and don't know what to do. Trump has spent the last 2 weeks trying to get his footing on how to even fight this political battle because he trained for one person, he ends up with a total different person, and he can't intimidate them. Everything he uses is not working. It's like training to fight Joe Frazier and you get Muhammad Ali. Now what do you do?
Donald Trump's polling lead in multiple swing states has evaporated as Republicans have struggled to stem the momentum of the Harris-Walz campaign. And in the past, when he was on the younger side, Trump's response would have been simple. Just get out there and do more TV and do more rallies. But now the 78-year-old is hardly campaigning at all. He's just compulsively posting angrily to social media and doing rambling press conferences like the one he did yesterday, although crucially from the comfort of literally his own house. The Harris-Walz campaign is trolling Trump for it, saying in a press release that Donald Trump is too lazy to fight for anything but himself or leave his country club. Fine by us. Now, in fairness to the ex-president, he does have one campaign event scheduled for this week. It's right there on the events page of Trump Vance. It is in deep red Montana, and it is tonight. Sure enough, here's a live look of people waiting for Trump at that rally site in the pivotal electoral bastion of Bozeman, Montana. Why there? Well, if you're feeling generous to Trump, you could say there is a genuinely competitive Senate race there, which was sort of what he suggested when a reporter asked about his light schedule yesterday.
Actually, I'm going out to certain places to help certain senators get elected, not even for me. I'm trying to help when I go out to Wyoming or when I go out to Montana, or I'm going to different places to help people. And I don't have to go there because I'm leading those states, as you know, by 35, 40, 50 points. I'm leading by record numbers. I'm going because I want to help senators and congressmen get elected.
Now, among other things, is there a competitive Senate race in Wyoming that I missed? Anyway, so the idea, if you believe Trump there, is that he's just that kind of guy. Like, he doesn't even want to do it. It's kind of a pain, but he's just doing it the kindness of his own heart. Except, you won't be surprised to learn, that's not really the story here. There is another reason that has to do primarily with a guy who is not from Montana and has nothing to do with Montana. And it's this guy.
Absolutely, he's fit for duty. I think he will remain fit for duty for the remainder of this term and even for the remainder of another term if he's elected.
Can you explain to me how a guy who eats McDonald's and fried chicken and all those Diet Cokes and who never exercises is in as good a shape as you say he's in?
It's called genetics. I don't know. It's some people have, just great genes. I told the president that if he had a healthier diet over the last 20 years, he might live to be 200 years old. I don't know. But I would say the answer to your question is he has incredibly good genes, and it's just the way God made him.
That was Ronny Jackson, the Navy doctor acting as Trump's presidential physician back in 2018, when Trump was being incredibly cagey amid questions about his medical and cognitive fitness. Jackson has now become a far-right conspiracy-spewing MAGA congressman in Texas. But that wasn't always going to be his next job after the Navy. You see, back in 2018, Trump wanted to reward Jackson for raving about his virility and health to the public. And that reward was to nominate Jackson to be Secretary of Veteran Affairs, running the $300 billion federal agency that provides crucial care and benefits to the nation's military vets. It was a surprise announcement, and it quickly blew up in Trump's face, after dozens of former colleagues came forward to allege that Jackson had misused prescription drugs, created a hostile work environment, and been drunk on the job. Those allegations were collected and investigated by the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and its top Democrat, Senator Jon Tester of Montana.
I understand he had a nickname in the White House among some of the White House staff.
And it was the Candyman because he handed out prescription drugs like they were candy.
The White House doctor, his nickname among some people in the White House was the Candyman.
That's correct. That's correct. That's what we were told.
Tester was reticent to discuss the allegations, but they were so serious, he said, that they could not be ignored.
I think what we've seen is a pattern of problems that people deserve to know. I know a lot of folks have said, mainly from the White House, is that, we shouldn't be doing this. Look, it would be senatorial malpractice for us not to follow up on this issue and find out what kind of a person Ronny Jackson is. And, Chuck, I've never done this before. I don't know. I just want to get the best person to run the VA as possible because our veterans deserve that. And these aren't my accusations. These are accusations by active and retired military personnel that have come to us. We're just trying to follow up to make sure what's true and what's not.
To be clear, Senator Tester was not out there on his own. In fact, he was supported by the Republican ranking member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee at the time, the chair, Georgia Senator Johnny Isakson, because they all knew the allegations against Jackson were numerous and serious. And eventually, the military would agree. The Pentagon released an investigation that concluded Jackson disparaged, belittled, bullied, and humiliated his subordinates, that he engaged in inappropriate conduct involving the use of alcohol, that he took Ambien while he was on duty. Offenses bad enough the Navy demoted him in rank to captain after he had retired. By then, Jackson had withdrawn from consideration as VA secretary and launched a successful campaign for Congress as a kind of Trump acolyte. Trump did not forget. He was so incensed that he couldn't just install one of his biggest cheerleaders as the head of the VA. He swore a vendetta against Senator Jon Tester, who was up for re-election that year.
And I watched what Jon Tester of Montana, a state that I won by like over 20 points, really, they love me and I love them. And I want to tell you that Jon Tester, I think this is going to cause him a lot of problems. For him to be doing this to this man and this family, I think Jon Tester has to have a big price to pay in Montana, because I don't think people in Montana, the admiral is the kind of person that they respect and admire, and they don't like seeing what's happened to him.
The captain, in point of fact. Despite Trump's efforts, Jon Tester won his re-election bid in 2018. 6 years later, Tester's running for re-election again. Again, it's uphill battle, right? It is Trump country, at least at the statewide level, the presidential. This week, Trump is going to Montana, and only Montana, to campaign against the Democratic senator that he blames for sinking Ronny Jackson's chance to do Trump's bidding at the VA. You can't get the guy off the golf course to campaign for his own re-election. He's not out there stumping with his own vice presidential candidate who's doing his whole stalker tour. He is only doing press conferences from the comfort of his own house at Mar-a-Lago. The only thing that gets this 78-year-old man on a plane and on the campaign trail, his one event, is a revenge tour. If you have any question about what would power a second Trump term, think about this. What will rouse an increasingly slow 70-year-old man to action? The answer appears to be pure spite.
Busy week in politics draws to a close. We are heading into a weekend marking just 3 weeks since that news broke that Kamala Harris was entering the presidential race when Joe Biden exited, driving headlines that shifted from all that Democratic panic and infighting to a kind of sheer party exuberance. Her campaign's been achieving a lot in these 3 weeks, reshaping the race into a contrast between the familiar and unpopular Donald Trump, who often looks like he's doing the political equivalent of airing reruns from seasons past, a contrast between that and this newer face for many voters, especially the non-news junkies, Kamala Harris. And even Donald Trump's reruns seem lower energy right now. He's holding far fewer rallies than past campaigns, doing less than half of the rallies he did in a similar stretch in the summer of 2016. And while Democrats are all in on this new race, embracing Harris with the donations and the memes and the big crowds, Trump seems stuck in the matchup that is now over, fixating on the history of his duel with Biden. Now, Trump addressed reporters yesterday in a kind of attempt to shake up a week that has seen Harris dominating and really dominating the news cycles and the message. But then during that set of remarks, he ended up talking about Biden again and adopting a stance that even his supporters probably do not buy, do not believe. Trump trying to express a narrative where he says he feels bad for how Biden was treated and left the race. Quote, the presidency was taken away from Joe Biden. He had a rough debate, but that doesn't mean you just take it away like that, Trump said yesterday. And the delegates have already formally voted to make Harris the nominee, but Trump's been posting online about how he kind of imagines or wishes that President Biden could still somehow come back and be his Democratic opponent again this year. And that's been driving headlines about how Trump can't get over this. And does anyone miss Biden as much as Trump? That's how the New Yorker is raising the question today, noting how for 18 days, Trump has refused to let go of his grief, alternating between anger and denial at the loss of his favorite target. Clearly freaked out by Harris's rise in the polls, Trump all but demanded Biden return to the race. Now, look, these are not the headlines that Trump's campaign team wants. They do not make Trump look strong. They do not offer voters anything. These aren't headlines about your life or the choice in November or policies, obviously. And these headlines don't even address Trump's current opponent. And, of course, in a campaign, you have to deal with the current opponent, not the one you wish you still had. This is Trump's opponent. Now, Trump lost his presidency to Biden, the defining rejection of his single term and political life. And he thought he could beat Biden this time. And he was not alone. Many Democrats saw the same prospect. And now Trump has lost in a different way. He's lost his rematch. He's lost his chance at political revenge. And if he does lose to Harris, he has lost the opponent he might have beaten. Trump is fixated on Biden for all those reasons. He seems upset, undisciplined, and unable to move on. He is hung up on this figure from the past. Trump verging on his own Costanza moment from Seinfeld, living in the past.
Forget me? You should forget it. You're living in the past, man. You're hung up on some clown from the 60s, man.
It's hard to live in the past. Most campaigns are about the future. Harris and Walz are making the case against going back. You've probably heard that mantra. Today they're campaigning in the battleground of Arizona, and we can see already, as we've been monitoring it, this is one of those time lapses of the very, very long lines of people waiting to see this new ticket. We should note it's over 100 degrees there, and people are queued up and waiting and waiting and waiting to get in to see it. Arizona is one of the places Trump lost to Biden when Fox News called the state for Biden. All heck broke loose at Trump's campaign. Harris has also released a new ad linking her middle-class story to Americans' priorities in the future of housing, prices, and health care.
She grew up in a middle-class home. She was the daughter of a working mom, and she worked at McDonald's while she got her degree. Kamala Harris knows what it's like to be middle class. It's why she's determined to lower healthcare costs and make housing more affordable. Donald Trump has no plan.
Those are the Harris campaign's priorities, talking to voters about policies in their own future. Where's Donald Trump tonight? Montana. Kind of a curious call. It's another day where Donald Trump is not in a battleground state, as he also holds fewer rallies, as I showed you. Trump's there to link up with a Republican Senate candidate. So this is the contrast. Some of it is kind of permanent or unshakable. There are things people already know about Donald Trump and his policies and his style, and there are things that the Democrats, first under Biden and now under Harris, are offering. There is a policy consistency. But the new contrast from Harris to Trump is clearly so different and so much scarier for Trump that he hasn't really fully absorbed it yet, and he's living in the past, exactly as that clown told George Costanza not to do. Now, the Democrats' recent past involves Kamala Harris evolving into the role she is holding today, where people feel that as vice president, she's got some real governing experience, and as a candidate, she is more experienced and polished than the last time that she's run for national office. So you think about the DNC, here was Harris at the last convention when she was the VP nominee.
My mother taught me that service to others gives life purpose and meaning. And oh, how I wish she were here tonight, but I know she's looking down on me from above. She probably could have never imagined that I would be standing before you now and speaking these words. I accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States of America.
We will hear something similar at the next convention, but maybe with more applause if it's not a COVID festivity. We're joined, as you see, by Juanita Tolliver, MSNBC analyst, author of the forthcoming book, A More Perfect Party, The Night Shirley Chisholm and Diana Carroll Reshaped Politics. You can actually get that on pre-order now, and why not? Eleanor Clift, writer with the Daily Beast, her latest, Tim Walz versus J.D. Vance, The Battle of the Veeps and Vibes, is on. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Ari.
Eleanor, the past is something to know and learn from, but not always to live in.
Right.
What do you think of this contrast in the way that Donald Trump, he lies a lot, we've covered that, we fact-checked that, but he also sometimes emotionally blurts what he's feeling, and he seems to feel that he doesn't want to deal with running against what may be a harder opponent.
He feels aggrieved, cheated. He was supposed to run against Biden. Now he's going to run against somebody else. He hardly knows her, but she's, of course, incompetent. And he is suggesting that there was some constitutional funny business, that really she has no right to be occupying this position. So he's always sort of, you know, it sounds kind of unhinged, but he's always salting the water for arguments that he's going to make later on. And he does not know how to run in any other way than he being aggrieved. You know, first the courts were getting him. You know, now the country has confused him because he has a different opponent. He has to start all over. The thing is that after a while, people want to hear what this election means for them. They're tired of hearing about him. And you're right about the rallies. People are leaving early. He keeps them waiting for an hour and a half in 90-degree heat. And then he goes on for an hour and a half and says some of the most absurd things. In his press conference yesterday, he's talking about taking on Martin Luther King Jr., saying that Trump's rallies actually have gotten more people than King did. King got 250,000 people in a country that was a whole lot smaller than it is today.
Yeah, per capita.
So I'm waiting to see what the Republicans have. I think the rap on Walz that he got out of the reserves because he didn't want to go to Iraq. He's fought that back before. I mean, and I don't think people are in a mood for this. Just because these attacks worked in the past doesn't mean they're going to work this time. And the liberal agenda that he's supposedly so radical, you go one by one, it's most things that poll very popularly and that most people would like child care, lunches that don't discriminate against poor kids who have to identify themselves as poor. So, I mean, everything is so good right now, I almost don't want to jinx it. So I'm going to go with the joy, but like Reagan once said, trust but verify, and there's a lot of hard work ahead.
Right, and the fact that there's more enthusiasm than there was is an emotion, and it's a start. Campaigns have to end, and there's a lot of voter turnout, in some cases registration and other work to be done, and that's true no matter what happens. Juanita, we see the warning signals, though, are also coming from the right. The Wall Street Journal is part of Rupert Murdoch's media empire, shared with Fox. They have this piece saying Trump might blow another election, saying in public what privates have been, what I should say, Republicans have been lamenting in private. They say Trump's lost a step, basically. The long speeches Eleanor just mentioned that become a, quote, bundle of personal grievances and impulsive floundering. He lacks any consistent message. And they say it's not only that he could blow the election, it could also hurt other Republican candidates.
Honestly, I'm saying welcome to reality, because this has been the case for years. Donald Trump is doing this. And when you were doing your intro about Trump being upset about Kamala Harris as his opponent, I was thinking of Lil Wayne, show me my opponent. And Harris and Walz are saying, hi, we're here, and we are ready to dominate this race. And we're seeing that by the line you showed in Arizona in 105-degree heat, people lined up, but also the people who are ready to do the work for the campaign. I'm talking about the donations, which have been historic, and 2/3 from first-time donors. I'm talking about 200,000 new volunteers have signed up for this campaign. They are ready to knock on the doors. They are ready to make the phone calls. They are ready to contact the voters, all based on their motivation or hope, as I think you're alluding to, that is presented with this new ticket, and the way that Harris and Walz campaign together in a joyous way, in direct contrast to the ramblings that make you question what is actually happening in Donald Trump's mind. Or, as he announced recently, he's not campaigning again until after the DNC. Then you have the Harris-Walz campaign saying, go ahead and get your rest, old man.
Yeah, get your rest.
We know you don't care
Take
about
your
anything
time.
or anybody except for playing golf, so go rest.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will officially go head-to-head on the debate stage in prime time on September 10th. But right now, Donald Trump says he's ready to get even more debates on the books. He's agreed to 2 additional face-offs in the month of September with Harris. But will she accept?
Are you open to more debate?
I'm happy to have that conversation about an additional debate for after September 10th, for sure.
He proposed 2 more debates.
Like I said, happy to have that conversation.
I want to bring in former Democratic Congressman from Ohio, Tim Ryan. Also with me, former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain, and the creator of The Circus, Mark McKinnon. Mark, is wanting more debates an acknowledgement by Trump he needs them? A strategy, believing she'll say no, so he's able to brand her as scared? What's your read on this?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's clear that Donald Trump now recognizes that his campaign is in a free fall, and he's got to do something to get the momentum back. And And it's telling that when Harris was first announced, he was doing all he could to get out of the debate because he knows what a great debater she is. And if you remember, there weren't a lot of high points in the Harris 2020 campaign, but the one really high point was when she knocked out Joe Biden in the debate. It just crushed him with a roundhouse. She's really, really good. And it's clear that Trump recognized that right off the bat. But now he's in a position where he realizes he's down and he's got to get back. But listen, I think Harris is a tremendous debater. I think she has a ton of confidence. And if I were the Harris campaign, I would adopt the anywhere, anytime, any place and debate him every day of the campaign from here till Election Day.
Congressman, would you do the same? I mean, look, she very carefully worded her answer, right? She said she would consider it after the September 10th debate. Put that in the context of what we know Donald Trump was proposing. Before September 10th, he proposed a Fox debate. So she's not saying she would consider that. She said she would consider afterwards. The debate after the ABC September 10th debate is scheduled to be on NBC. But does any of that matter? Is Mark right? Any place, any time. She is known as the prosecutor.
Yeah, I agree with Mark. I think that she's going to be willing to do it. Obviously, she doesn't want to get boxed in one way or the other at this point and let those conversations happen. But this is absolutely to her advantage. I think this is a recognition of the trend lines happening in this campaign. The energy, the polling is closer, if not has Kamala Harris ahead. She's framing up these issues like I think you played a little bit earlier. On the immigration issue, she's the tough prosecutor. And they got these other dynamics going, not just generational change versus old and grumpy with Trump, but you also have, the new ideas that are coming online. You've got the prosecutor. I mean, it's just lining up really, really well for her. And she's going to want to show everybody her personality and her intelligence at these debates. I think it'll be a big deal for her.
I mean, we've seen her before, right? We've seen her plenty. Folks who were in California saw her in debates there. She was a presidential candidate, so she did those debates. But we also saw her when Vice President Harris took on then VP Mike Pence in their 2020 debate. Here's one moment a lot of people talked about at the time.
$100,000
He said he's
a year.
Going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well, wait.
I'm speaking.
Is he only going to repeal part of the Trump tax cuts?
If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then
Please.
have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. Mark, is that how you can handle, though, a Donald Trump?
Exactly, and that's why Trump is it's so fun to watch. He just doesn't know how. You know how to deal with Joe Biden. He doesn't know how to deal with Kamala Harris, and that's a really good example right there. She is very confident and she's strong. And having done a lot of presidential campaigns, the perception of strength is the most important asset a candidate can have. And that's why Joe Biden was in so much trouble, largely because of his age. He was just seen as weak. Trump, despite his age, is seen as old. But now he's the old guy. And whatever you think of Kamala Harris, she is not weak. She is very strong and she's very confident, and especially so on a debate stage. So I expect that when she's on stage, there'll be a lot of moments like that, and Trump won't know how to deal with it. And by the way, Trump's cognitive ability, that used to be the daily sort of news about Biden. Now it's the focus on Trump, and the debates will only enhance that.
Congressman, ABC says the debate will be 90 minutes. It'll be moderated by two of their anchors, David Muir, Lindsey Davis. But the exact format, the ground rules, have not been worked out yet, apparently. From what we saw in the last debate, when they had no live audience, no fact checking, but also those mic cuts, how important are those? And if you were on Harris's team, how would you argue?
I would keep it wide open. I don't know if you can have a crowd there, but you're not running for a ruckus seat in Congress where you're at debates and people are screaming and yelling at each other. The American people want to hear a conversation, so you can have a crowd there, but make sure it's people are being respectful. But I think a format that's wide open and will allow her to show her scope of knowledge on these issues that she's dealt with in the Senate. She dealt with the criminal issues and the prosecutorial issues in California. She's now been vice president for 3.5 years, understands the foreign policy issues. So I say let it rip. Let Kamala be Kamala and let her go out and do her thing. And she has a secret weapon, and her secret weapon is, in the military, countries try to send missiles, and other countries jam those missiles with devices. She is, just because of who she is a jamming device on Trump. Like Mark said, she scrambles him. He doesn't know how to handle her. And I think the more scope you have in a debate, the more you're going to allow that to show. And you're also going to allow people to understand that, do you really want to spend the next 4 years of your life listening to Donald Trump talk about anything? I think people are going to get exhausted with him. And so a wide open format, I think, would bring that home as well.
Joining me now, New York Times editorial board member Mara Gay and MSNBC contributor and columnist Charlie Sykes. So, Mara, I was at that news conference yesterday, and I tried to press Donald Trump on whether he would ban mifepristone. He ducked. Let's watch. Would you direct your FDA, for example, to revoke access to mifepristone? That's one of the things that's been discussed.
You could do things that would supplement, absolutely. And those things are pretty open and humane. But you have to be able to have a vote, and all I want to do is give everybody a vote. And the votes are taking place right now as we speak.
But that's something you would consider?
There are many things on a humane basis that you can do outside of that, but you also have to give a vote, and the people are going to have to decide.
I'm going to show you we edited only for brevity there. We didn't take out anything that would somehow make that answer make more sense. Mara, what do Donald Trump get wrong about the potency of this issue, and what do you make of the answer to that question specifically?
I'm so glad that you asked the question and in the way that you did. Listen, Americans know, no matter what their view is on the issue, and most Americans, the vast majority, do actually support reproductive freedom. Americans know that Donald Trump is personally responsible for the Supreme Court appointments that led to the fall of Roe v. Wade, to the Dobbs decision. We can only look at his record to see what he's done, which is that he's attacked and clawed back women's freedoms rather than protecting them. So that is a known entity. That's what we know. We also know that Donald Trump is going to do whatever is politically expedient for him in any given moment. And I think the way he answered your question really hints at that. I mean, this is a man who was initially, before Kamala Harris became the frontrunner, he was trying to distance himself from abortion bans, from the Dobbs decision. He was trying to soften the party's platform on reproductive freedom. I don't believe that was working with voters. But listen, now that it's clear that Harris has such momentum, the Harris-Walz ticket, he's really doubling down his base. We saw that when he attacked Black Americans, Black women at the NABJ convention. We are seeing that as he's attacking Kamala Harris with racist attacks. And now we're seeing it on abortion. He's signaling to the far right, I need your support, and I'm maybe willing to do whatever it'll take to get that, even if it's doing something extraordinarily extreme like banning mifepristone.
Interesting. Charlie, the Republican Party is desperately trying to get Donald Trump to focus on some of Kamala Harris's missteps, some of her past policy positions that they believe might be out of the mainstream. But he's doing things like talking about crowd sizes and some of those other points that Mara made. How do you view the kind of delta between the Republican playbook to take on Kamala Harris and Trump's ability to execute on it?
Well, it's pretty dramatic, isn't it? It all comes down to the candidate's stupid. And, I read all of these analyses of what the party is trying to do, what his campaign strategy is, and ultimately it doesn't matter if Donald Trump comes out and makes has a performance like yesterday. I mean, I think that what was on display yesterday was just the pure incoherence, his unfamiliarity with the policy issues, his lack of interest in the policy issues. Garrett, I actually read the transcript of your question and answer 5 times this morning before coming on. And one of the questions I had in my mind was, did he even know what he was talking about? I mean, this is like, I remember in 7th grade when you don't read the book and you have to write the book report or you're asked about it, and you just come up with this kind of word salad. And I think this is the problem with Donald Trump. He doesn't give, 5 minutes of thought to any of these substantive issues. Now, however, going back to Mara's point, she's absolutely right. clearly he thinks that he can throw out certain things about abortion, but he's uncomfortable about it. But where he goes, no one has any idea. And this is going to be the case from now until November. Now that Joe Biden's out of the race, we have to have these serious conversations about what is going on in the prefrontal cortex of Donald Trump. What is happening with his, cognitive coherence? Because you're not even seeing basic sort of connection of the dots. And I think that the question you asked and his absolute failure to answer is a pretty good indication of the problems a campaign has trying to say that they have some sort of a logical, coherent, consistent policy or proposal on anything.
Mara, to Charlie's point, I mean, the answers are very telling, but this was the middle of the day on a Thursday in the summer. The Olympics were on. Maybe not that many people actually saw any of what Donald Trump said yesterday. People are going to see the debates. How important do you believe these debates, I say plural, but at least one that we'll have next month will be in deciding this race?
I don't know that they're going to be determinative. And I do think that it's going to be a different place in voters' minds than that debate that we saw that was disastrous for President Biden. Because, I think that VP Kamala Harris is certainly up to the task. So it's going to be very difficult for Donald Trump. The onus is going to be on him. He doesn't sound coherent. He sounds less coherent than he's ever sounded. So if that's how he looks in this debate, it could be disastrous for him. I hope that we can get into some of the issues. Because, of course, that's another area where actually the Democratic agenda is far more popular than the Republican agenda, starting with reproductive freedom, which is, I believe, one reason why you haven't seen the Republican Party and you haven't seen Donald Trump keenly on message. As much as we may want to say, let's have policy debates, I don't know that that benefits Donald Trump because his policies, including the 2025 agenda that he's trying to distance himself from, are exceptionally unpopular with many Americans.
So, Charlie, if we take that premise then that this is a debate that, has a lot of risks for Donald Trump, that it, is the kind of thing we would expect to see Harris perform well, what would you say are the potential pitfalls? What does she need to be looking out for? What does the ticket need to be looking out for to not sort of trap themselves in this moment that's otherwise potentially going to be about Donald Trump's weaknesses?
Well, it starts with the fact that she's going to have to sit down with reporters for long-form interviews. She's going to have press conferences, and she's going to have to go off script. Now, she's exceeded expectations time and again, but clearly Republicans have the sense that, perhaps once you get her away from the teleprompter, that she's going to be more vulnerable. I am a longtime skeptic about the impact of debates on campaigns, but I do think that in a campaign like this, which is really at this point pretty much a jump ball, it could be decisive because I think that people are going to tune into that. And I think that the contrast you're making with the conversation we're having today and those debates is really important because I do think that people are going to be watching that because they want to know, what are these candidates saying? What are they going to do? But also there's going to be sort of the morbid curiosity of, are we going to see a car crash? Are we going to see a meltdown? What is going to happen? So these debates may be the most consequential since the 1960 Kennedy-Nixon debate, although I don't think that Donald Trump should be compared to either John F. Kennedy or Richard Nixon.
Some of these things, some of these quotes, Donald Trump was talking about John Heilemann.
Yeah.
And I think Peggy Noonan's column in the Wall Street Journal hits it on exactly where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris find themselves in this very topsy-turvy political season. First of all, Peggy writes, I continue to believe the woman isn't creating a movement, but a movement is creating her, and they are showing up. And man, are they showing up. Mr. Trump spent most of the week having what a GOP strategist told Politico is a public nervous breakdown. It's Donald Trump. And then finally, another telling quote from Peggy. And this is fascinating. For the first time this week, I thought people were wondering about the impact of Mr. Trump's age. He is 78. He hasn't been able to focus, make his case. Is he and another irony of 2024 turning into Joe Biden. And the split screens have not been good for him at all this week, John. And you look at the polls, and you can read these polls that are coming in, and it is only August, but there certainly is momentum. But there's also, again, something that we haven't seen from Donald Trump since 2016, and that is just the complete failings of his political instincts to rise to a moment.
Well, I think you're seeing fear, Joe, apart from everything else. And I just want to say, kind of playing off that last bit of the sound there where he said, he's letting the Democratic convention go through. I wanted to announce right here on the show that I'm going to allow Morning Joe to continue for the rest of the morning in the same spirit as Donald Trump. I have about as much control over that as Donald Trump does over the Democratic convention. So I think, people predicted that this would happen. The thing related to Trump becoming now the old man of the race, and that the focus there was a lot of discussion about this when Joe Biden was still in the race. People would say, correctly, Donald Trump is also an old man. Donald Trump is also slipping, losing miles an hour off his fastball, has difficulty processing as a cognitive matter, and they would say there's a double standard here, and you would say, yeah, there's a double standard here. And I'll tell you what the double standard was always. The press is terrible at focusing on two things at the same time. And for a long time, the fact that Joe Biden's affect, that he seemed less energetic than Trump, gave Trump, not saying it's a good thing or justifying it, it was just what happened, was that people focused on Biden.
Right.
And Trump's failings in this area got ignored, even though we, on many occasions on this show, we would point to various Trump mental failures.
Right.
Now, though, without Joe Biden in the race, the press is focused on that question. And it's much more glaring to people that how many cognitive failures Donald Trump has, especially when he stands in an unscripted way in front of the press. And it's part of it's cognitive, part of it's psychological, part of it's emotional. The tics, going back to the same grievances over and over again, the inability to process really basic facts, the massive errors that he makes all the time, the incoherence, all those things are standing in much starker relief now, which gets to your point that I think is the key point and the point that Peggy's making. It is just the case that the split screen now is a split screen that is much more punishing to Donald Trump than the split screen when it was Joe Biden on the other side of that screen. And again, you can talk about how you like the world, how you want the world to be. Yeah. I'll tell you about how the world is.
It's just
that's the reality.
It's so funny you said that last weekend. Caddy, last weekend, my kids and I were watching the Olympics, and there was a local news break, and they showed it was one of these, poll came out and it showed the split screen and the two candidates on both sides. And it was the first time that I had seen Kamala Harris, 59-year-old Kamala Harris, I think she's 59, next to 78-year-old Donald Trump. And it was quite jarring. Politics is all about contrast. That's what I learned in the first campaign school I went to 30 years ago. They said the campaign is about contrast. The visual contrast is striking. You look at the press conference yesterday and the exaggerations and the outright lies that were told in Donald Trump's press conferences, also talking about us being on the verge of a depression when the United States is more powerful economically relative to the rest of the world than it's been in 20, 30, 40 years. And I could go down that list again, but there's no need. People know that that's the truth. But you have Kamala Harris saying, we love our country. We believe in our country on one side. And then you have Donald Trump on the other side saying our country's lousy. That is, and again, going back to Peggy Noonan and her life's work, regardless of ideology, Americans want optimism. They want hope. They want someone looking to the future. And boy, that is another stark contrast that you see in yesterday and in the previous few weeks.
Yeah, there's a lot more kind of Sonny Reagan about the Democratic ticket at the moment than there is about the Republican ticket. And you see that in all the rallies. I mean, you see it in the fact that Donald Trump is not really holding rallies. He's holed up in Mar-a-Lago. He's doing one rally today in Montana, a state where he's 15 points ahead. So that's kind of head-scratching. But it was a case of grievance, and that's what we're seeing from the campaign. And case in point about Donald Trump's mental acuity. During yesterday's news conference, he told a sort of weird story about nearly dying during a helicopter ride. But as the New York Times points out, there was only one problem with the story, or maybe two, or maybe three problems. Here's the ex-president yesterday at Mar-a-Lago when asked about former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, who briefly dated Vice President Kamala Harris nearly 3 decades ago. Take a listen.
Well, I know Willie Brown very well. In fact, I went down in a helicopter with him. We thought maybe this is the end. We were in a helicopter going to a certain location together, and there was an emergency landing. This was not a pleasant landing, and Willie was he was a little concerned. So I know him pretty well. I mean, I haven't seen him in years, but he told me terrible things about her. But this is what you're telling me anyway, I guess. But he had a big part in what happened with Kamala. But I don't know, maybe he's changed his tune, but he was not a fan of hers very much at that point.
OK, so it's an odd story, but what's the real issue with that story? Well, it appears it never actually happened. First, Trump was never on a helicopter with Willie Brown. He's apparently confusing him with former California Governor Jerry Brown. Take a look. The two don't really look terribly similar. Secondly, there was never any emergency landing, as Trump claimed, and the helicopter's passengers were never in any danger. Mayor Brown, who, as the Times notes, loves regaling anybody who will listen with stories, said, quote, "You know me well enough to know that if I almost went down in a helicopter with anybody, you would have heard about it." And according to Gavin Newsom, who was also on that ride, there was never any discussion at all about one Kamala Harris. For his part, Willie Brown isn't saying terrible things about Harris at all. In fact, he remains an avid supporter of hers. You understand why they use the word weird. The group took a helicopter to survey wildfire damage in 2018, an event where Trump would confuse the name of the town that was destroyed and also claim the solution to California's wildfire crisis was to, quote, rake the forest floors. So do you remember that, raking the forest floors,
yes.
Joe? That was one of those particular. Anyway, the story didn't make sense. It didn't really happen. The people were different from the people he said it was. Otherwise, I guess all good.
I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, you know, Rev, it reminds me when we got into that sort of dust up on the International Space Station. Stayed up there longer than we expected, and it was Tension City. You know, yesterday the Wall Street Journal editorial page wrote an op-ed talking about how Donald Trump now seems primed to lose yet another race that he should win. And you look at this press conference, you look at the fact that his people just don't want him to go out and give speeches. I'm sure they didn't want him to go out and give the press conference yesterday, but Donald Trump probably still driven by that belief, I alone can do it. But again, it just there's nothing comforting about that. And again, I go back to Peggy Noonan asking the question, or saying for the first time this week, I thought people were wondering about the impact of Mr. Trump's age. He is 78. He hasn't been able to focus to make his case. Is he, in another irony of 2024, turning into Joe Biden? Well, he's certainly nothing that's happened the past week would suggest otherwise, would it?
Nothing would suggest otherwise, but I would say to anyone that Joe Biden never just started remembering emergency landings of helicopters with people that didn't exist. I mean, even the story within itself. Can you imagine in the middle of an emergency landing, you start talking about somebody you dated years ago in bad terms? I mean, the whole story doesn't make sense, aside from the fact that he had the people mixed up. And then he said that his rally, January 6th, drew as many people as Martin Luther King's March on Washington. I assume he's talking about 1963 because that's the only March on Washington Martin Luther King had. He said, they said Martin Luther King had 1 million and I had 25,000. That's what they said. Well, first of all, the Million Man March wasn't until 95, 27 years after King was dead. King didn't call that march. And the fact that he would compare the Million Man March or the King March of 250,000 to who he had January 6th, and not remember January 6th was an attempt to overthrow an election, shows that I think we might have chose the wrong old man to walk off the stage.